A sudden, mysterious blizzard swept across the globe in just a few days, bringing human civilization to the brink of collapse. But this deadly snowstorm wasn't a natural disaster, it was the first wave of an alien insectoid invasion. Faced with these ruthless hunters from the depths of space, the last of humanity was forced to rise and resist in a frozen apocalypse. The story begins in Buenos Aires, on an unusually sweltering summer night. This city, torn apart by the gap between rich and poor, was teetering on the edge of unrest. In the slums, residents marched in protest over days of power and water outages, while just a street away, the wealthy district was still brightly lit. Neon flashing, Juan and a few of his friends were playing poker in a villa. Suddenly, the entire city went dark, even the last lights in the wealthy area were snuffed out. They scrambled to pull out lighters, the flickering flames casting confused faces in the pitch-black room. Just as they were about to resume the game, a strange, muffled thudding echoed from afar like something heavy crashing repeatedly to the ground. Juan's wife, Clara, rushed down the stairs in a panic, her voice trembling with fear. She had just seen their friend, who went out to get takeout, lying face down in the yard through the upstairs window. Everyone suddenly noticed tiny white particles floating outside, barely visible in the darkness. They seemed like snowflakes, gently falling from the pitch-black sky. This discovery shocked everyone, because it was the height of summer in the southern hemisphere. Temperatures in Buenos Aires should have been over 30 degrees Celsius. Even more chilling, cars were crashing out of control on the street, their drivers showing no reaction at all, not even basic braking. One pulled out his phone, but all signal was lost, and the landline only emitted a hollow, busy tone. As they recalled that strange crashing sound, one friend suddenly turned pale. He remembered his wife and young daughter alone at home. Ignoring everyone's attempts to stop him, he grabbed a coat and dashed out the door. Through the window, they watched in horror as he stepped outside, only to collapse like a puppet with its strings cut. The temperature inside the house was plummeting rapidly. Someone shakily guessed it could be a solar storm or nuclear electromagnetic pulse, but they soon realized the truth was far worse, because until the first light of dawn, not a single living soul was seen on the entire street. Just as despair settled over the house, someone noticed a faint light turn on in a second-floor window across the street. A sleepy neighbor stood at the window, puzzled by the sight of people holding oil lamps. Everyone frantically waved, trying to warn him not to open the window, but the bizarre behavior only fueled his curiosity. The moment he leaned his head out, those seemingly harmless snowflakes landed gently on his face. Within seconds, his body stiffened and collapsed onto the windowsill. His wife rushed over at the sound, shaking his shoulder in confusion, unaware that snowflakes were landing on her bare arms. A second later, she too collapsed to the floor. As daylight broke, Juan realized that hiding any longer would only lead to death. With everyone's help, he put on a heavy winter coat, a protective mask, and gloves, making sure every inch of skin was covered. His friends nervously encouraged him as he carefully opened the door. Sure enough, the deadly blue snowflakes were harmless as long as they didn't touch bare skin. He gave a heavy look at the snow-covered bodies of his two friends, took a deep breath, and stepped toward the city center. The entire city was eerily silent. Buildings on both sides with doors and windows wide open, but not a single sign of life. When he finally reached the plaza where the protests had erupted the night before, the sight was suffocating. Hundreds of people lay sprawled in the snow, the bitter wind howling as it swept the flakes across their bodies. One tightened his coat and trudged onward through the empty streets, holding onto a sliver of hope to find other survivors. A twisted corpse hung from a utility pole. It looked like a repair worker. His body was unnaturally wedged between metal beams, face frozen in agony. Juan barely gave it a glance. He had seen too many similar scenes along the way. A shopkeeper frozen in the act of opening the door. Lovers locked in a final embrace at a bus stop. A taxi driver slumped over the steering wheel. Buenos Aires had become a massive open-air graveyard. Not even a single bird remained. Just as numbness was setting in, a sharp whistle cut through the silence. Juan looked around alertly and saw, through the swirling snow, a soldier in an Argentine uniform standing at the intersection with a submachine gun. But when he blinked, the figure vanished like a mirage. He didn't dare linger and quickened his pace toward Bartolome train station. Inside, the scene was equally horrifying. Bodies lay sprawled across every corner of the platform. Some were frozen mid-run, others curled in corners, each frozen in their final moment. A passenger-filled train stood silently on the tracks, surrounded by fallen travelers who never made it on board. Just as Juan was about to leave, he heard a faint tapping through his gas mask. To his shock, terrified faces were pressed against the train windows. Their screams were completely muffled by the soundproof double glass. One girl quickly scribbled help with lipstick on the frosted window. Juan cautiously circled to the other end of the train, entering through a snow-free door. A dozen survivors huddled in the narrow space at the end of the carriage, with bodies strewn across the corridor behind them. Through fragmented hand signals, Juan learned they had been trapped for over 6 hours and anyone who tried to leave died instantly. The temperature inside was dropping fast, and passengers clung together in thin summer clothes. Juan couldn't speak clearly through his mask. Seeing the desperation in their eyes, he hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a large bottle of water and tossed it over. The survivors lunged like starving wolves, and Juan quietly slung on his bag. Ready to move on, he promised to try and find help. Sparking a frenzy inside the carriage, people begged him wildly, and one man, overcome with emotion, rushed the door but was dragged back by others. Juan stumbled through the snow to his daughter's apartment building, where faint candlelight flickered in the stairwell. There were still survivors here. Ignoring everyone else, he ran straight to his daughter's door, but the lock had already been broken. When he burst in, his heart sank. The room was empty, with overturned furniture suggesting someone had left in a hurry. He trembled as he picked up a photo frame on the desk, his daughter's smiling face bringing tears to his eyes. Just then, a strange man entered. Juan lunged like a lion, but the man panicked and explained he was just a volunteer gathering medicine. As Juan loosened his grip, the man's eyes widened in shock. He was staring at Juan's hand. A few crystalline snowflakes were stuck to it. Juan looked confused, brushing the flakes off with his other hand, not understanding why he hadn't collapsed like everyone else. At that moment, his ex-wife Elena burst into the room. She tearfully explained that she'd tried calling and texting him all night without success. She had learned their daughter Clara had gone to a friend's house and was now missing. As they were making plans to find her, they opened the door only to find the hallway packed with survivors. That volunteer had already spread the news that one had touched the snow and survived. The crowd's eyes lit up with desperate hope, and they bombarded him with questions. Juan frowned and denied being immune. He believed the snow lost toxicity over time after hitting the ground. Asked how to move through the storm, he emphasized, as long as you avoid skin contact, you'll survive. Just as he and Elena were preparing to leave, a thuggish man named Lucas blocked the way and rudely demanded Juan's mask. The building's water pipes had frozen, and survivors needed to go out to find clean water, but all Juan could think about was his daughter. He pretended to comply, then suddenly pulled a pistol from his bag. The tense standoff instantly exploded. Others in the hallway also had guns, and gunfire erupted in the narrow space. Juan and Elena fled to a room on the first floor, bolting the door as it shook under the attacker's assault. He fired through the cracks to slow them down, quickly strapping the gas mask onto Elena. As her figure vanished into the blizzard, Juan let out a long breath. That's when he noticed a few plastic bags on the ground. The door burst open, and Lucas stormed in with 5 or 6 armed thugs. In that instant, Juan spun and smashed a chair into the window, letting the blizzard roar inside. Lucas and his gang screamed and fled. Seizing the moment, Juan shoved a plastic bag over his head and leapt outside, but the crude protection couldn't withstand the cold frost quickly formed inside. After running barely 100 meters, he collapsed from oxygen deprivation. When he regained consciousness, he was lying in the back of an old Ford. From the driver's seat came a familiar voice. It was his firefighter friend. Firefighters had protective gear that allowed them to move safely in the deadly snow. Elena sat in the passenger seat. She had run into his old friends during her escape and brought them back to rescue Juan. The truck rumbled through the snow, the outlines of Buenos Aires fading in the storm. An entire family slumped lifeless around a dining table, plates still holding steamed fish. Juan's eyes were drawn to a black-haired girl slumped at the edge. His breath trembled. Her face was hidden by her hair. Juan gently lifted her chin, and when he saw the unfamiliar Asian face, he exhaled with relief. Hours earlier, after recovering at the fire station, Juan and Elena rushed to their daughter's school. The security guard at the gate was frozen stiff in his chair. Juan found the school bus keys on the desk, while Elena went to search inside the building. A few student bodies lay scattered across the playground, beer cans and playing cards hinting at a final celebration before death. After confirming that her daughter wasn't among them, Elena had just let out a sigh of relief when a rhythmic knocking suddenly echoed from the far end of the hallway. Clutching her firefighter's axe, Elena followed the sound and stopped in front of a bathroom that had been barricaded shut. Through the narrow gap in the door, she saw a pair of bloodshot eyes. It was a Chinese exchange student, cursing frantically in a mix of Mandarin and Spanish. One arrived shortly after and slapped the panicked boy across the face, snapping him out of it. Only then did the student, named Pablo, calmed down and explained that his classmates had locked him in as a prank, and he'd been stuck there for 2 days. Juan told him grimly that those friends hadn't come back to open the door because they were already dead. The poisonous snow outside had raged for a full 48 hours if he wanted to survive. He had to leave with them immediately. Although Pablo nodded in agreement, his eyes flickered with doubt. Just as Juan turned to leave, Pablo suddenly bolted out of the bathroom but stopped dead at the hallway window. He clearly saw his prankster classmates frozen in twisted poses across the schoolyard. His voice began to tremble as he asked Juan what had happened to them, but Juan admitted he didn't know. When Elena took out a photo of their daughter Clara, Pablo shook his head in confusion. Then, pointing to the girl in the center of the photo, his eyes lit up. She was a classmate from one of his electives. Juan and Elena's hope reignited, and they eagerly asked for the girl's home address, but Pablo suddenly set a condition: he would take them there, but afterward, they had to bring him back to his own home. Juan frowned deeply, but with no better option, he agreed. Once they arrived, Juan ordered Pablo to stay in the car while he and Elena searched the house. Juan pounded on the door, but no one answered for a long time. Eventually, he stepped back and kicked the door open. Inside, the house was deathly silent, with only his voice echoing through the empty living room. Meanwhile, back in the car, Pablo wrapped his head and hands tightly in his coat, trembling as he opened the door and stepped into the dim hallway. In the backyard, Juan came upon a scene that nearly froze his blood. 7 or 8 people lay sprawled in distorted positions around a patio dining table near the pool. Snowflakes were still lodged in their hair and clothing, clearly having been killed during an outdoor meal by the deadly storm. Fighting his fear, Juan knelt and lifted the head of one of the girls. When he saw her unfamiliar Asian face, he let out a long, relieved breath. But at that moment, a piercing scream rang out behind him. Pablo had recognized his parents and younger sister among the fallen. He went berserk, trying to rush toward them, but Elena caught him around the waist just in time. Juan quickly shut the sliding glass door, sealing off the blizzard outside. Pablo thrashed violently in Elena's arms until he fainted from grief, his forehead burning hot. Juan frowned at the unconscious teenager, instinctively wanting to leave him behind, but Elena took off her coat and laid it over Pablo, firmly insisting they bring him along. If it were Clara out there, she said, wouldn't you hope someone kind would help her too? The words pierced Juan like a blade at last. He agreed. On the road, they spotted the flickering sign of a roadside pharmacy still swaying in the wind and snow. Juan decided to stop and search for fever medicine. They pried open the side door and searched the shelves inside. Just after giving Pablo the medicine, urgent pounding came from the front entrance. Through the glass, they saw a pregnant woman at the door, begging for help, saying her water had broken. Without hesitation, Elena unlocked the door, but as soon as the woman stepped inside, she suddenly stood up straight. At that same moment, her accomplices rushed in from the side, pointing guns straight at their faces. The robbers quickly locked Juan and Elena in the back pharmacy room and stole all their supplies and car keys. Fortunately, Pablo, still unconscious, had been placed in a nearby storage room and went unnoticed. Once the sound of the car engine faded, Pablo woke up and unlocked the door. The 3 of them trudged through the blizzard on foot, deciding to take shelter in Juan's friend's apartment 3 blocks away. As they neared the train station, Juan suddenly stopped and looked around warily. All the corpses that had lined both sides of the tracks had vanished, only scattered backpacks, shoes, and belongings remained, outlining eerie human shapes in the snow. Even more disturbing, the barbed wire fence surrounding the station had been ripped open, leaving a 2-meter wide gap. Strands of strange fibrous material hung from the twisted metal edges. Juan followed the tracks and found the same train from the previous day, once filled with the dead, but around the carriages, nothing remained. Summoning his courage, he boarded the train and scanned every seat. The stiff corpses from the day before had all mysteriously vanished. When he reached the carriage where the survivors had been trapped, what he saw shocked him. The carriage was completely empty, only large patches of translucent slime remained on the seats, glowing faintly in the dim light. Meanwhile, the 2 robbers were driving into a remote gas station. The man got out, cursing as he filled the tank, but paused when he heard a faint noise behind the fuel container. He raised his flashlight and the beam revealed a terrifying black silhouette. Back in the car, the woman was bobbing her head to music when the vehicle suddenly shook violently. Thinking her partner was playing a prank, she turned only to see his flashlight lying on the ground. A second later, with a screech of metal, the entire car was flipped and sent tumbling into a roadside ditch. A giant insect dragged a human corpse toward a hole it had burrowed between 2 shallow snowdrifts, pulling its prey underground. Just as Juan and his companions were preparing to leave, he slipped and slammed into the wall. causing his submachine gun to discharge. A giant insect burst from the hole. Juan pulled the trigger, sparks flying off its armored shell, but the bullets couldn't penetrate. Holding his breath, he aimed at the creature's exposed head. One final shot took it down. Before they could catch their breath, the ground beneath them began to shake violently, and the sound of scraping claws echoed from all directions. Just then, someone appeared in a distant building window, waving frantically at them. Juan grabbed his companion and ran. Moments later, sickening chewing sounds followed. The newly emerged insects were feasting, even devouring the body of their fallen friend. Seizing the chance, Juan and his companion fled, following scattered footprints in the snow until they reached a Gothic-style church. The heavy iron doors were shut, and just as the swarm closed in, a burst of fire exploded on the lead creature. Looking up, they saw someone at a second-floor window tossing Molotov cocktails. They darted through a side alley where a group of a dozen survivors was gathered. An old man told them the demons came from the lights in the sky. "Go upstairs," he said, "and see for yourself." One followed the old man up the bell tower, still skeptical. In the pitch-black sky, countless comet-like lights pierced the clouds. Each falling fireball marked the arrival of another wave of alien insects. At last, one realized the horrifying truth: this wasn't a natural disaster, but a carefully orchestrated alien bioweapon attack. And the real nightmare had only just begun. One told the survivors in the church about everything he had experienced. He and his companion had planned to risk returning to the city to search for his daughter, but they were forced to stop at the elevated highway leading into downtown. The entire bridge was clogged with hundreds of abandoned vehicles. Twisted doors and shattered windshields silently testified to the chaos that had taken place. As they were searching for an alternate route, the roar of engines suddenly came from afar. 3 military trucks, packed with fully armed soldiers, slowly approached, and the officer in charge used a loudspeaker to order them to turn back immediately. As the military trucks drove off, their taillights fading into the distance, one unwilling to give up decided to follow them, but the reckless move was quickly spotted by alert soldiers. As the two of them reversed in a panic, a wave of screeching insect sounds erupted from the other end of the overpass. Alien creatures surged forward like a tidal wave, and the soldiers who had claimed they were there to rescue people were one by one overwhelmed by swarming insects. Back in the church, the survivors split into 2 camps, arguing fiercely over whether they should flee. With food running low and monsters lurking just outside, they ultimately decided to leave the cursed place and seek out the larger military force. A dozen people, carrying makeshift packs, slipped quietly through the side door, while Juan and a mother with her child fell behind. Trapped between 2 overturned buses, through the shattered bus window, they clearly saw 3 massive insects prowling just 10 meters away. One of them suddenly stopped and turned toward the bus. At that critical moment, the sound of a bell rang out, echoing across the city. The 2 elderly men who had stayed behind stood atop the church bell tower, using the last of their strength to pull the bell rope. All the giant insects immediately turned and surged away like a black tide. Once the swarm had retreated, the others crossed the overpass. Inside the church, the insects flooded toward the bell tower like a wave of darkness. The 2 white-haired elders sat calmly inside, their hands tightly clasped, watching the swarm burst through the doors. One of them gently tossed his last cigarette onto the gasoline-soaked floor. At that same moment, a lone insect suddenly scurried out from under a wrecked car. Just as its tendrils were about to wrap around the last man in the group, a tear gas canister rolled perfectly beneath the window ledge. The creature writhed and withdrew in pain, but the one that had escaped soon returned with reinforcements. The swarm used brute force to knock down a billboard on the overpass, flooding the area with dozens of insects. One stood in the truck bed, firing continuously. His short-legged enemies finally stopped chasing. As the vehicle sped away, someone pointed to the horizon far off. The church bell tower had turned into a blazing torch. That soldier had been the only survivor of the battlefield. In the bone-chilling wind, bodies of both comrades and enemies littered the ground. Suddenly, a sharp whistle sounded behind him. The soldier turned with great effort and saw, through the falling snow, a mysterious man in a gas mask standing not far away. The man stood silently in the storm, his eyes behind the mask locked onto him like a hawk. Juan woke with a start, his pajamas soaked in cold sweat. He had been the only one to survive that battlefield, and that memory haunted him like a recurring nightmare. To this day, it still found its way into his dreams every time it snowed. While passing a fire station with a group of refugees, Juan insisted on getting off to look for his wife Elena. Pushing open the familiar firehouse door, he was stunned to see Elena sitting safely on the couch, holding their sleeping daughter Clara in her arms. Tears welled in his eyes as Juan gently touched Clara's face. Barely able to believe it, He asked Elena how she had found their daughter, with tears shimmering in her eyes. Elena replied, "I didn't find her, she found me." After revealing the terrifying truth about the alien insects to the others, the group decided to gather all remaining survivors, including Juan's wife, daughter, and a few old friends, and head for the military's island refuge on the Rio de la Plata. The scenes along the way were somewhat reassuring. Civilians wearing protective helmets walked the streets in small numbers, completely different from the insect-infested region beyond the overpass. However, when they finally reached the port, what they saw chilled everyone to the bone. The sea, which should have been roaring with waves, had completely dried up, revealing a cracked seabed. Hundreds of ships were stuck deep in frozen sludge like abandoned toys. One frozen fisherman still sat in his chair, while a small fish swam happily in the bucket next to him. Someone in the group turned pale and raised a long broken compass. They suggested the alien insects may have disrupted Earth's magnetic field, and that the sudden retreat of the sea often foreshadowed something far more terrifying, a massive tsunami capable of engulfing the entire city. In the silence of despair, the group had no choice but to turn around and head for a military base on the opposite side of the city. The highway resembled a frozen steel serpent, packed with abandoned vehicles stretching endlessly into the horizon. What was truly eerie was that there wasn't a single living soul on the entire road. No one knew whether they had died in the toxic snow or had become stored rations for the insect horde. Not far ahead, a strange column of black smoke caught the group's attention. Upon approach, they found an overturned car, its fuel leaking and burning in the snow. Juan recognized the car. It was the one that had almost hit him on the street earlier. Now, the driver lay in a pool of blood in a twisted position, 2 bullet holes clearly visible in his helmet. Juan was convinced this was no accident. Everything pointed to a much darker truth. Humanity had begun turning its weapons on itself. After traveling nearly the entire day, they suddenly came across a brightly lit supermarket beside the highway. A smiling middle-aged man enthusiastically came out to greet them, introducing the place as the largest survivor gathering site nearby. He claimed the warehouse had enough supplies to feed tens of thousands for several weeks. After enjoying a long overdue proper meal, Juan cautiously brought up the corpses he had seen along the way. The people at the table immediately changed their expressions, and a woman quietly confirmed hearing similar rumors. Apparently, a group of thugs had been active in the surrounding area, believed to be escaped convicts from a nearby prison. Juan looked at the group's leader, feeling certain he had seen that face somewhere before. The next morning, a commotion jolted Juan from sleep. Following the crowd to the supermarket entrance, he saw everyone staring up at the sky. The deadly blizzard that had raged for days had finally stopped. The sudden, clear sky brought tears of joy to the survivors as they embraced each other. Feeling the first glimmer of hope, brave Chinese exchange student Pablo was the first to step out of the supermarket, took a deep breath of fresh air, and turned back to the crowd with a smile. Just as cheers erupted, his friends suddenly stared in horror at his compass. The Earth's magnetic poles had completely reversed, and the needle now pointed stubbornly in what should have been the opposite direction. Suddenly, a car screeched to a stop at the entrance, and 3 armed, masked men jumped out, opening fire on the crowd without warning. By the time one arrived at the entrance, the plaza had turned into hell. Wounded people lay moaning in pools of blood, while survivors scattered like panicked insects. Elena, trembling, told him that Clara had just been outside playing and now she was missing. Juan's years of special forces training kicked in. Instantly he grabbed his submachine gun and swiftly organized to counterattack. The roar of a familiar voice snapped him fully into focus, and he aimed at one attacker mid-reload, firing a shot straight into the assailant's forehead. One masked man spotted 2 children hiding in a trash bin. Surprisingly, instead of harming them, he gently closed the lid and slipped through a side entrance into the supermarket. When Juan shot the final attacker, he pulled off the mask, revealing a weary-faced middle-aged woman. Around her neck was a necklace strung with hand-drawn charms made by a child. The sight made Juan's hand tremble slightly. Why would a mother kill innocent civilians? What dark truth was hidden behind this massacre? Just then, the rumble of military trucks echoed from the distance. A convoy filled with soldiers and survivors slowly pulled into the supermarket parking lot. After speaking with them, Juan realized this was the very unit he had originally planned to join. During the earlier ambush, their RV had been riddled with bullets. With no other option, they quickly bandaged the wounded and squeezed into the military transport trucks. As the convoy trudged along the muddy, snow-covered roads, no one noticed the masked man who had escaped from the supermarket sneaking into a sewer entrance several kilometers away. What was terrifying was that the damp, dark tunnel was packed with swarming alien insects. Even more bizarrely, the creatures didn't attack him. Instead, they made way for him. As if he were one of them, Juan and the others packed into the truck, heading to the May 1st military camp. At that moment, Juan suddenly recalled something from Christmas Eve before the disaster while shopping for a gift for his daughter. He had seen a young mother struggling to choose a toy for her son. She had been wearing the exact same necklace as the female attacker. Juan jolted awake from his nightmare, drenched in sweat. Since suffering a head injury during the war, fragmented dreams like these had haunted him constantly. By now, they had reached the May 1st camp. His friend Favali noticed his condition and, worried, urged him to see the military doctor. Favali was summoned to the command center. He had once been a communications officer, and the base had an old-fashioned radio that required skilled operation. The military planned to broadcast the coordinates of evacuation sites to all survivors, and needed professionals to install a transmitter downtown. They planned to use a reinforced freight train to break through enemy lines. Favali turned pale. The insect horde in the city center was massive, and he had seen it with his own eyes. To him, the mission was suicidal, but another man believed it had a good chance of success and even volunteered to go with him. If they could send out the message, countless lives could be saved. That night, the group of convicts actively sought out Juan and asked him to persuade Favali to join the mission. They explained that the train engine was at the Jose C station, and the driver was one of them. He had learned to drive from his grandfather. After a sleepless night of deliberation, Juan finally convinced his nervous friend and decided to join the dangerous mission himself. At dawn on May 1st, over 20 volunteers tearfully bid farewell to their families and set off in makeshift rafts down the river. Along the way, several heavy bombers roared overhead toward the capital. It was proof that the military was launching a counteroffensive. Hope for humanity still remained. Upon reaching the abandoned nuclear freight station, the tech team began modifying the locomotive. As the upgraded train belched black smoke and rumbled out of the station, no one noticed a cloaked woman atop a distant water tower quietly recording everything. The combat team took their positions, while those in the front cars strapped themselves down with safety ropes in preparation for the violent impact ahead. With a deafening roar, the train accelerated. At the end of the track stood a massive blockade made from hundreds of wrecked cars. Alien insects swarmed across the tops like worms. The steel behemoth smashed into the barrier with unstoppable force, carving a bloody path through the swarm. But the triumph was short-lived. The driver soon realized the fuel tank had ruptured during the crash, and gasoline was leaking rapidly. Just a few hundred meters from the target building, the train came to a halt. The team regrouped, warily observing the eerily silent city. Along the way, the wreckage of a downed bomber puzzled them. The insects couldn't fly, so what had brought it down? After reaching the target building, the officers split the group into 3 teams. The tech team carried their gear to the rooftop to install the transmitter. The combat team built defensive fortifications around the perimeter. 4 others were sent to investigate the downed bomber. One scanned the area uneasily. The city was too quiet. They had stormed into the heart of the insect hive without meeting any resistance. The unnatural calm was deeply unsettling. The scout team of 4 approached the bomber's remains. Markings on the fuselage confirmed it belonged to the Peruvian Air Force. Inside the mangled cockpit, they found several unexploded bombs. The intended target was the famous River Plate Stadium in the city center, but the bomber had mysteriously crashed in a residential area kilometers away. As they puzzled over this, a lookout shouted a warning. At the far end of the street stood a boy, no older than 10, staring straight at them. When they called out, his eyes revealed something was terribly wrong. Realizing the danger, they scanned the surroundings. Dozens of heavily armed soldiers suddenly rose from the sides of the street, the same cold, inhuman glow in their eyes as the boy. At the same time, on the rooftop signal station, Favali had finally finished tuning the equipment. A soldier with headphones took a deep breath and began broadcasting to the outside world. His voice was carried on the waves across vast distances. After the setup, they programmed the transmitter to repeat the message every 5 minutes. Just as they were preparing to evacuate, someone pointed to the River Plate Stadium. In the darkness, an eerie blue glow flickered within the massive building, pulsing like a living, breathing creature. Juan immediately reported this to the commanding officer and suggested sending a team to investigate. But the officer hesitated. No word had come back from the team sent to the bomber. They had no extra manpower. Later, someone claimed they saw the team return and said they'd gone to guard the train. That night, as some played cards to pass time, Lucas behaved oddly. The skilled card shark kept making rookie mistakes, losing hand after hand. Then, without warning, Lucas lashed out, stabbing a teammate in the stomach with a hidden knife. He bolted from the room. One chased him and cornered him on the rooftop. In the moonlight, the former friend gazed dreamily into the distance and muttered strange things, praising how well they had performed. His voice turned hollow and unfamiliar, a creepy smile on his lips. Before Juan could react, he leapt from the building, vanishing into the darkness below. The group ran downstairs in shock only to encounter returning patrol soldiers. When they called for help, the soldiers suddenly yelled for backup to capture them. The group fled to the train platform, and the man left in charge scrambled to start the engine. No one understood why their allies had suddenly turned. Pale with dread, Favali realized it had all been a trap. The officers and soldiers, they were part of it too. Juan quickly devised a plan. Favali and an injured soldier would return to the camp to warn others. He would go alone to the stadium to uncover the truth. Surprisingly, another man volunteered to join and taught Favali how to operate the train. On the way to the stadium, Juan and his companion witnessed something horrifying. Humans wandered the streets, some walked in a trance, others fired guns mechanically, as if training. Even worse, the alien insects moved freely among them in eerie harmony. Beneath the red light of the insect mothership, the stadium was packed with a formation of humans and insects standing side by side. All eyes faced the empty field. Juan suddenly remembered where he had seen one of them at the neurology clinic hallway. They had both received treatment from the same doctor for brain trauma. But the next sight stole his breath. A blinding blue light burst from the stadium's central pavilion. Juan realized what was coming might be humanity's true enemy. As the light intensified, a hand with 17 long fingers slowly emerged. With its bizarre movements, the humans below lined up like puppets on strings. Juan instantly understood. The insects were only the vanguard. This species used mind control. They didn't need to fight. They blocked cities with bugs, then enslaved survivors through psychic manipulation. He was horrified to realize the May 1st camp was a trap. They created a fake resistance base, sent controlled agents to attack survivors, forcing others to seek refuge there. Just like Lucas showing up with a convoy right after the ambush, it was all scripted. Juan imagined his daughter Clara trapped in that nightmare. What looked like a last hope for humanity was actually a conversion facility. New arrivals passed recruitment tests, then were taken to perform missions transformed into perfect puppet soldiers. He went cold. If every human city had one of these resistance camps, humanity's fall was only a matter of time. The invaders didn't need war. They just needed us to destroy ourselves. One lie at a time. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.